Okay, everyone, a big Shabbat Shalom to all of you. Welcome to the river. We pray that you are having a wonderful Sabbath and that if you're watching this after the fact, that you had a wonderful Sabbath. It's an exciting time as we're in the lead up to the fall appointed times, and true to our Father's good nature, his Spirit is being poured out, not only in a general sense as we approach the end of this age, but in a very real temporal sense that here and now, his Spirit is pouring out. And yet again, as we approach his appointed times, he's giving us insight, understanding, and more importantly, we're seeing repentance in his wider body. And this brings great joy and great comfort to know that the Father's hand is in our lives. And so we want to welcome you. If you're watching after the fact and you wish to come join us live, we meet every weekly Shabbat on the Gregorian Saturday at 9 a.m. PST, Pacific Standard Time. And if you're wondering how to join the live stream, just go to riverbranchfellowship.com, scroll down on the homepage, and there's a button, a link there to subscribe to our weekly newsletter, which when clicked upon will bring up this little box where you can enter in your first and last name and your email. And that will sign you up to our weekly newsletter, which gets sent out every Friday. And as part of that newsletter, you will get the Zoom login details for the live stream. So if you wish to come say hi, we would welcome you, and we would be more than happy to have you join us live. Okay, part 2 of the Psalm 42 and 43 series. We're going to look at the vision of Zechariah, namely that of the 2 olive trees and the menorah. And some of you may be thinking, how on earth is the vision of Zechariah tied to Psalm 42 and 43? We'll get there. And so before we jump into today, we're going to quickly recap on part 1, because part 1 forms a general foundation for what we're looking at today. Again, this is going to be the series overview for what we're doing before we hit the fall appointed times teachings. And last week we looked at the storms of life. So this was more of a general teaching regarding our general lives and the storms of life that we experience on an individual basis, and the trials and the tribulations, and why Yah would allow these things in our life, because there is a purpose. Yah doesn't do anything without cause. So we looked at how Psalm 42 and 43, these 2 Psalms were originally one Psalm. It's only with our modern Bibles and our modern paragraph headings and verse breaking down that this one Psalm, this one poem, as it were, was actually broken up into 2 separate Psalms. It's generally thought to be written by King David during his flight from his son Absalom and his usurping of the throne. And so this is a key point to understand when reading this psalm, because again, David was experiencing Yah's water spout over his life. He was experiencing the waves crashing down upon him. But when you understand that this is the physical context David was experiencing, while David was having things occur to him, he would have, through the trials, I believe, he would have been brought to a place of actually looking in the mirror and having to ask himself, did he have a part to play in generating the very situation of Absalom usurping his throne? And when you understand King David's life and what he went through and the things he did and things he should have done but didn't do, you can actually see that David would have had a part to play regarding Absalom's usurping of the throne. Now, yes, Absalom has his own sovereign choice and free will to do what he did, but Absalom didn't get to usurping the throne overnight. There was a process that led up to that. And when you understand King David's story, he absolutely had a part to play in this. And I believe that when David was going through this particular crushing, it would have brought him to this place of looking in the mirror, actually. Key point, David's actions and lack thereof can be traced as the root cause of Absalom's usurping. Again, what happened to King David was not necessarily fair. But did King David have a part to play in the lead up to these actions taking place? I do believe so. And this is a key, an important point to understand of when the storms of life come our way, that it should force us to look in the mirror and go, have I got a part to play in these unfair cards being dealt my way, so to speak? We saw that there was a chiastic structure in Psalm 42 to 43, and that ultimately this was a journey from Elohim's quote unquote distance presence. We know that his word and his spirit is with us, but it's not in the intimate sense of Yah's physical presence being there. And that this psalm, this lament, as it were, is detailing a journey from going from Elohim's distant presence all the way to Elohim's intimate presence. And that this intimate presence ultimately comes with the fulfillment of the fall appointed times, when our king will physically come to earth with his bride and there will be a bridal governance. However, the journey from distant to intimate usually comes with a few things. And as we go through the trials of our lives, quite often we think that we may have been forgotten by Elohim. We feel this way, right? And while that's not the actual case, that doesn't change our feelings through the trials. Quite often as we go through these trials, we will get persecution from the dishonorable vessels within the house. But the focal point of this journey is that you get this juxtaposition going on, that even though King David had a confident expectation that he shall again praise Elohim, even though he knew that the end result would be Elohim's intimate presence, this was being juxtaposed with the battleground of his mind and how he was feeling at the time. And so you see that, you know, King David has a hope, he has a confident expectation, but despite knowing that, intrinsically, he's struggling, and that is okay. It's part of the journey of getting us from this distant presence to the intimate presence, and that ultimately these storms and breakers being over our lives are to help us, refine us to get from A to B, okay? As the Apostle Paul would say, that on one end, he says, I have a crown waiting for me. But then we also know he said, I do the things I don't want to do, and I don't do the things I ought to do. Who's going to deliver me from this body of death? And so even the Apostle Paul, in his own way, is expressing this focal point of the journey. He knows what the end result is. But that doesn't change the fact that here in the flesh, he experienced the struggle, the wrestling, and the battleground of the mind. Most of us will understand that for Jacob to go from being Jacob to being Israel, he had to wrestle with Elohim and overcome. He had to wrestle with man. And so again, this journey from distant to intimate is always seasoned with these feelings of being forgotten by Elohim, this struggle despite our confident expectation, and that through this we will experience persecution and chiding from those within the house, never mind those out of the house. We saw that King David was experiencing the battleground of the mind, and he's lamenting this in this focal point of the journey. David knew that Elohim was humbling him at the heart level. He understood that the reason the waves and the breakers were crashing down upon him were to examine him. This word shavar, which is to examine, which is where the word mishbar, breaker, comes from, that these are there for the purpose of refining. David knew that the end result of being humbled would be that he would be in Elohim's intimate presence. But that didn't change the fact that King David was experiencing the battleground of the mind. And this is the nature of the time domain that we're going through right now. The Elohim's breakers on our lives are for the purpose of examining us. Again, this word shavar at the root of it means to examine. However, the word shavar also has a secondary meaning in that it can mean to long for, to hope for, to wait on someone, and to hope for something. And so not only do these trials examine us, but they're there for our hope. And we will deal with the hope within us when we get to part 3. But I made the point that relationship, love, goes 2 ways in a normal relationship. And so while we love Elohim, while we wait on Elohim and hope for Elohim, and we have this examining thing going on, that goes the other way. And I asked the question, who is Elohim waiting on and hoping for? Why is he even allowing his people to be examined through the fires, examined through the storms? Who is Elohim hoping to come out of this trial? And I believe that this is an allusion to his bride. That the reason Elohim is refining his people, the reason he sifts them and allows them to go through the storms of life, is that a bride is eventually going to come out refined. And that I believe that is who Elohim is truly waiting on and hoping for. We see that Job had the same outlook as King David, or should I say King David had the same outlook as Job. Yet his love had not been perfected. We see that Job still had an element of fear in his life. He said, that which I fear has come upon me. And we know that from the book of 1 John, perfect love casts out all fear. Is this part of the reason for the storms in our life, that they're there for our refining so that it can bring his bride to a place of perfect love, so that as she awaits the bema seat of Messiah, perfect love has cast out all fear of judgment? Curtis and I will speak on this as we go through the Fall Appointed Times teachings. We see in Ecclesiastes 3 that there is an appointed time for both good and evil, and that this experiencing of good and evil is actually part of helping us overcome. That toil was given to us as a result of the fall for our sake, for our refining. And modern society, especially Western modern society, has basically done things in a way that you avoid this process. And by avoiding this process of good and evil, you're actually avoiding the very garment preparation that's required for you to go from this place of distant presence to Elohim's intimate presence. Let me phrase it this way. Modern society and the whole Babylon system, the religious system, no matter which side of the riverbank you're on, is actually robbing you of your garment preparation by either praying away evil or teaching you to avoid it at all costs. This process is actually to humble us, that we should fear before him, as Ecclesiastes 3 says. And so if you're not going through this process of the storms of life and overcoming them, you're actually not being humbled and your love is not being perfected, which is a bridal requirement. So this avoiding of the process is actually robbing you of the potential of being bridal material. This is how serious it is. And so this ties in as to why Yah would even allow this to happen to his people. Because remember, Elohim is waiting and hoping for someone to come out of this trial, out of this refining. And this is an intrinsic part of his great plan of redemption. This process of overcoming is actually a bridal gift from the king. Solomon understood this. He flat out said that the process of refining is a gift from the king, and that this word matan or matat in the masculine, this is the same word used for the dowry that a groom would pay for his bride. And so will you accept the bridal gift from the king? The bridal gift from the king is that he's handing you over a process that guides you to that intimate presence that we are all seeking and yearning for. And this is how we experience the renewing of the mind. Paul says in his letter to the Romans, I think it is, that we need to experience the metamorphose of the mind. We are being changed, metamorphosed. And metamorphosis, it involves wrestling. It involves struggling. It's even put into the actual shadow picture of the creation. And it's by the testing of our lives, by the storms of our lives, by being put through the fire, is that will teach us what the will of our Father in heaven is. And his desire, again, this ties back to who is he hoping for and who is he waiting on? Okay. Let's get into the brunt of today's teaching. So I want people to think of part one as the general, how it applies to you in your daily life. Today, we're going to look at the storm of all storms, if that makes sense. So we know that part one was about the trials and tribulations of our lives. Now, we know that there is a great tribulation coming for his people. It's called the Great Tribulation. These 3.5 years, these 42 months, 1,260 days, however you want to label them. But today we're going to look at the storm of storms, okay, for his people. So we're going to look at how Psalm 42 leads us to the vision of Zechariah, which then leads us actually to the Great Tribulation. So this is why I wanted to do it in this order, because we need to understand what the storms are for. We need to understand their purpose, how they apply to us on an individual level, so that we can then go on to understand how it applies to us at a corporate House of Israel level. We looked at this verse last week. Deep calls to deep at the roar of your waterfalls. All your breakers and your waves have gone over me. And so we saw that this word waterfall is better translated as water spout. Think of it as a water tornado, okay? These were common in the Middle East. And so this word here, waterfall, it doesn't really do it justice in the English. It's this idea that we know the imagery of Elohim is in the storm, right? He spoke to Job from the midst of the storm. And so this waterfall, the Hebrew word here is tsinur, okay, tsinur. It means pipe, culvert, gutter, spout, conduit, water spout. Essentially, in the root of this word, it encapsulates something that is tubular, something that is like a tube that you have to go through or that something goes through. Okay. So think of it as a tube that is narrow and hard pressed, right? This imagery of narrow is the way to life. Hard pressed is the way to life. You know, if you go through it, through this hollow tube, as it were. Now, the word sinur, those of you who understand a bit of Hebrew will know that the way Hebrew is constructed is that you get a thing called a word family. Now, sinur is not the root word itself. It's one of the words that's part of this overarching family of words. The root is actually tsanar, okay? Now, tsanar is the root here. You've got the letter tzadeh, you've got the nun, and the resh. Now, from this root is the word sinur, pipe, conduit, spout, which is what we see in Psalm 42. Now, there's another word that's part of this word family that's constructed from this root, which is tsantarot in the plural or tsantara in the singular, okay? And it means pipes. And this word appears once in Scripture, and it appears in Zechariah's vision. And so this is now our link, our fulcrum point, as it were, from Psalm 42 and 43, but also now to Zechariah's vision. And by comparing these two Psalms, this is where we know that the root word here, tsanar, has this idea of a pipe, something that is tubular, a conduit, something that takes something or someone from A to B. And again, think of what the chiastic structure of Psalm 42 and 43 is. It's a journey essentially from A to B, from a non-intimate presence all the way through to an intimate presence. And that the way from A to B is through this narrow tube of storms, of pressing, of crushing, of refining, and that this has the purpose of examining us and refining us because Elohim is waiting and hoping for someone to come out the other end, okay? So let's go over to Zechariah 4:12. Let's see how this tsantarot is used scripturally. We're going to look at Zechariah 4, verse 1. And the angel who talked with me came again and woke me like a man who is awakened out of his deep sleep. And he said to me, "What do you see?" I said, "I see, and behold, a menorah all of gold, with a bowl on the top of it, and 7 lamps on it, with 7 lips on each of the lamps that are on top of it. And there are 2 olive trees by it, one on the right of the bowl and the other on its left." Okay? Now, just to help you visualize what the prophet Zechariah could have been seeing, this is an artist rendition of Zechariah's vision. Now, there's many different artist rendition, but the key components of these renditions are all the same. You have this menorah of gold in the middle, okay, with a bowl on top of it and 2 olive trees standing either side. And we're going to see that there's a pipe from each olive tree feeding into the bowl and then feeding into the menorah, okay? Now, what is the menorah a representation of, biblically speaking? We know from the book of Revelation that the menorah is actually representation of his assembly, of his people, of the house of Israel, okay, his house. And so we have these 2 olive trees standing either side of the menorah, okay? Let's keep going. Then I said to him, "What are these 2 olive trees on the right and on the left of the menorah?" So we can see that the prophet Zechariah, we can assume that he understands what the menorah is pointing to, but he's asking a really good question. What are these two olive trees? Now, Zechariah would have had an understanding, of the olive tree and, the branches being broken off and these wild branches being grafted back in, as the Apostle Paul would speak of. But he's asking this question, well, what are these two olive trees on the right and on the left of the menorah? And a second time, I answered and said to him, what are these two branches of the olive trees which are beside the two golden pipes from which the golden oil is poured out? Okay. And this is where the word pipes come up, tsantarot, okay? It's in the plural form here. In the singular is tsantara, pipes feeding lamps with oil. And so this is how we know that the root word tsanar has this idea of a conduit, a pipe, something that is tubular. So the word used in Psalm 42 is tsinur, which is this water spout. But in Zechariah, we have the word santara, or santarot in plural, these pipes feeding this oil, or so we think, to the two olive trees. So going back to our little diagram, this is how we know that essentially this is what we're dealing with in the vision. A menorah with a bowl on top, two olive trees beside it, and there's a pipe going from the olive trees to the bowl, and then from the bowl it's feeding the menorah, or it's feeding his assembly, okay? Now, what we saw in part 1 is that Elohim is the water spout. He is the conduit, right? That's Elohim is where the storms are coming from, and that these are for the purpose of refining, okay? So we can already make a good assumption that Elohim is this pipe. Elohim is the conduit that's feeding something from the olive trees into this bowl, and from the bowl it's going to his assembly, okay? Now, here's what's really interesting. Where it says that these pipes are feeding the golden oil to the bowl, the word oil is not actually in the Hebrew. It's actually being supplemented by the translators. And we'll get as to why that is, okay? I can understand why the translators would have added this word oil in, but there's a part of me that's like, just leave the text alone, guys. Just because you don't understand or it doesn't make sense, leave it alone. Let's let the word speak for itself, okay? This means when you take out the word oil, what you get is, what are these two branches of the olive trees which are beside the two golden pipes from which the gold is poured out? The gold. So now, this is what the Hebrew says. Now, if gold is being poured out, what state is it in? Is it solid? For gold to be able to be poured, it has to be in liquid form. And for gold to be in liquid form, it has to be at a very, very, very high temperature, does it not? i.e., it has to be refined. It has to be in the refiner's pot for it to even be poured out. And so let me ask you this, where does one buy gold? What does the book of Revelation say about buying gold, specifically gold refined in the fire? Does it not? And so for gold to be refined in the fire, what state is it in? It's in liquid form. This is gold that's been heated to such levels that it's molten. And so what we're seeing in Zechariah is that these olive trees feeding liquid gold is coming from them, and that these pipes feeding into the bowl and into the menorah are feeding this molten gold to the assembly. Now think about this. If Elohim in Psalm 42 is the water spout, he is the conduit of the storms of life refining us. You go to Zechariah's vision and you're seeing essentially that Elohim is the conduit that's feeding gold refined in the fire to his assembly. This perfectly matches the biblical imagery that's from Genesis right the way through to Revelation. It really changes up the meaning of the vision, doesn't it? And it's right there. It's right there. Let me ask this. Which assembly is told to buy gold refined in the fire? Which of the 7 assemblies is it? It's Laodicea, the lukewarm assembly. And so what I believe is an inference here, we can piece together that what we're dealing with is a lukewarm house of Israel, a spiritually apathetic people, a people that have one foot in, one foot out. This is going to be key to understand something as we go deeper into the teaching, because it's the lukewarm assembly of Laodicea that is told, buy gold refined in the fire from me, says Yeshua. Does he not? Buy it from me. And so by piecing together this statement to Laodicea and plugging that into Zechariah's vision, all of a sudden Zechariah's vision, you're starting to understand what it means. There's these 2 olive trees. We'll get to that. Elohim is the conduit, the pipe, the tube, the means by which gold refined in the fire goes from the olive trees to his assembly. This is perfectly matching up to the foundation of what we covered in part 1 regarding the Elohim is the water spout, allowing the crushing of our lives, the storms of life, to refine us, because he's waiting and hoping for someone. Now, what's really interesting in that statement to Laodicea, what's the promise given to he that overcomes? You will sit with me on my throne. You will sit with me on my throne if you overcome through the crushing, if you buy gold refined in the fire from me. And so what we're seeing in the statement to Laodicea is a lukewarm house of Israel with a bridal promise given to it. If you buy gold refined in the fire and if you overcome, you will sit beside me on my throne, i.e., you will be my bride. If you overcome through the storm. And so I believe what we're seeing in the vision of Zechariah is that Elohim, the pipe, the Tsantarot, this tube, is feeding gold refined in the fire to his assembly from the 2 olive trees. Which now begs the question, what do the 2 olive trees point to? I'm glad you ask. So let's look at Zechariah's vision a bit more. He said to me, the angel speaking to Zechariah, do you not know what these are, the 2 olive trees? I said, no, my master. Then he said, these are the 2 anointed ones who stand by the master of the whole earth. Okay? Now, anointed ones. You would think from the English that the word or a variant of Mashiach would be used, what we would call a Messiah, because we know that there are multiple Mashiachs in Scripture. King David was a Mashiach, an anointed one, because Mashiach just means one who is anointed. Okay. Messiah is the Mashiach, right? There's just like there's other Elohim, but there's an Elohim of Elohims. There's actually several Mashiachs, but there is a Mashiach of Mashiachs, if that makes sense. Here's the problem. This is not the word being used here for these two anointed ones. The Hebrew there is B'nai HaYitzhak. The phrase B'nai HaYitzhak literally means sons of new oil. Okay? The term B'nai means sons, and Yitzhak means new oil specifically, not just oil from the olive, because oil generally is the Hebrew word shemen. But Yitzhak is actually new oil. So this is the first press of the crushing of the olives, okay? Now, it's because of this phrase that the translators added the golden oil. Remember what I said regarding, that Zechariah could see these two pipes feeding golden oil to the menorah? The word oil is not in the Hebrew, but the reason the translators put it there is because these two olive trees are called the sons of new oil. So they've assumed, okay, what do assumptions do? They've assumed that these two olive trees are feeding oil, golden oil. But that's not what the Hebrew says. The Hebrew, if you leave it alone, it says that these sons of new oil are feeding gold to the menorah. So, again, if you plug the book of Revelation, especially the statement to Laodicea into it, it makes perfect sense, especially on the foundation of Psalm 42 and 43, when you understand crushing imagery, refining imagery, the storms of life imagery, more specifically, that which is required to test and examine you, okay? So, how does this apply to the two witnesses? Let's look at Revelation 11, verse 3. I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Elohim of the earth. This is a direct quote and allusion from what we've just read in Zechariah 4. These two olive trees are the two sons of new oil who stand by the master of the whole earth. Okay? So when we go to Revelation, it's telling you who the two olive trees are. Remember, it's the revelation of Messiah and his plan of redemption, which means that in Revelation, answers are being given to you. And right now, we're being told this is who the two olive trees are in Zechariah's vision. I don't even have to stretch it. It's a direct quote. It's telling you these are the two olive trees. And so what we're seeing in Zechariah's vision is the two witnesses. Elohim is feeding molten gold, gold refined in the fire, from the two witnesses into this bowl, and then that's going to his assembly. That's what you're seeing in the book of Zechariah. It's actually telling you, and I believe this is giving us great insight into what the nature of the ministry of the two witnesses will be, and actually the purpose of the Great Tribulation, how it goes to the house of Israel. Zechariah's vision actually gives us further insight into the role of the two witnesses. And I believe that this is being grossly overlooked, even by myself, up until I was putting this study together. Here's the question I want to ask. What if the role of the two witnesses is not just for the nations? That we'll get into that. Because everyone thinks that the two witnesses, their role is for the nations. And we'll get as to why that is. But what if their primary role is actually for the house of Israel? This thought had never crossed my mind before. But when you plug Revelation into Zechariah's vision on the foundation of Psalm 42 and 43, well, look, Zechariah's vision is telling us the two witnesses, the two olive trees, Elohim is feeding gold refined in the fire from them into his menorah, his assembly, which means that actually we need to double back and go, hang on a minute. That means the role of the two witnesses is primarily for the house of Israel, not for the nations. What does this mean? Let's get into it. We're going to look at Revelation 11 because that's the chapter that gives us what the two witnesses are all about. Verse 1. Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff. Now, the word there for staff in the Greek is rhabdos, which is the Greek equivalent to the shevet, the authority that the king wields in his hand. It's the regal scepter, okay? That's what's being used here. A measuring rod like a scepter, a kingly scepter. And I was told, rise and measure the temple of Elohim and the altar of those who worship there. Now, dispensationalism and the majority of prophecy teachings will tell you that this is speaking of a physical temple. Problem. The Greek is very specific here. The word for temple here is naos, the naos of Elohim. This is the true Holy of Holies. And we know that the temple of Jerusalem was destroyed. We also know that the presence of Elohim was never in that temple. But more specifically, we know from the writings of the Apostle Paul that his assembly, the assembly, you, plural, are the naos of Elohim, the true Holy of Holies. This verse is not saying that a building of mortar and stone is being measured. His people are being measured. This is key. What are they being measured up against? A scepter. Again, Curtis and I are going to delve into this as we go through the Fall Appointed Times teaching, but I'm just sowing some seeds here. What Revelation is telling you here is that the true Holy of Holies is being measured by the kingly staff, the kingly scepter. The true naos is his assembly, and another image for that is the menorah. That's what's being measured. And those who worship there. What does Yeshua say? No longer on this mountain shall you worship, but those who seek to worship the Father will worship him in what? Spirit and truth. This is speaking of his people. Do not measure the court outside the temple, the naos. Leave that out, for it is given over to the nations, and they will trample this holy city or the set-apart city for 42 months. This period of great tribulation. Now, here's the thing. Do not measure the court outside the temple. If you understand the temple precinct and how the tabernacle was set up, you had the Holy of Holies within the tabernacle. And then next to that, you had the holy place, right? That was still within the tabernacle. But then you had the outer court, which is where the altar of sacrifice and the brazen altar was. The brazen laver. The outer court is still part of the tabernacle/temple complex, okay? If you understand that. Remember, you had to wash yourself even to go into the temple court. You had to go through the ritual washing to even be able to come in and offer your sacrifice. Now, here's what's really interesting. Revelation 11 is saying, measure the naos the naos, the holy of holies, but do not measure the court outside. Now, again, the court outside is still within the temple complex. Why is this important? If you understand that his assembly is the naos, is the temple, is the tabernacle, who was it that was allowed to enter into the Holy of Holies? The high priest. I'm going to make some knee jerks here. Moshe. I've done teachings on this in the past, but for the sake of time, I can't go through this today. Moshe could enter the Holy of Holies. I also believe his bride will be able to enter there. Again, intimate presence, whole other thing. This place of intimacy. But what is being given over to the nations, the outer court, which is still part of the tabernacle system? If you're to apply the weightier picture on this, it's his bride that's been measured, his bride measured by the scepter, and essentially those that do not make the bridal cut. That's what's being given over to the nations. The outer court, again, remember the outer court is still part of the tabernacle, which we are. Will everybody be the bride from the house of Israel? No. This is key to understand. I know this challenges a lot of prophecy teachings. And so why is this important? Because we're going to see that a woman is going to be protected in the wilderness for 1,260 days. And she'll be nourished. And a woman, okay, what's the woman representing of? People will say, oh, it's the house of Israel. I believe it's speaking of the bride. Something is being measured and something else from the temple is being cast over to the nations to be trampled or to be refined, to be sifted, to go through the storm of storms. Let's keep going. I will grant my authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Who are they prophesying to? Again, notice the parallel. The outer court of his assembly is being given to be trampled for 42 months. By the way, couple this with the statement in the book of Daniel that the beast, the fourth beast, will have authority to trample on the saints for 42 months. The book of Daniel, coupled with this, is telling you that his people are going to be trampled on by the nations. Why? Could it be to do with Elohim's water spout, trials, tribulation? What's being fed from the two witnesses, the two olive trees? Gold refined in the fire. Being trampled is a pretty serious refining. And so we see that the two witnesses are going to be prophesying during this same time. That this perfectly makes sense of the vision of Zechariah. That there's gold refined in the fire, trial, tribulation, being fed from the two witnesses by Elohim to his assembly. What's the purpose of it? Psalm 42 is telling you to get you from A to B, from a not intimate presence to an intimate presence. This makes sense of the statement to Laodicea. If you buy gold refined in the fire, and if you overcome, you will sit on my throne. But that's a conditional statement, which implies some people are not going to make the cut. Well, that makes sense as to why the outer court is being trampled on. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Elohim of the earth. Oh, hang on. Let me plug my laptop in. It continues. If anyone would harm them, the two witnesses, fire pours from their mouth and consumes their foes. If anyone would harm them, this is how he is doomed to be killed. I believe this has overtones of Elijah's ministry. Elijah and his student, Elisha, they're known for calling fire down from heaven. Oh, they're known for it. I also believe there's an overtone of the rebellion at the end of the millennial reign, where it says fire comes down from heaven and consumes the rebels. So we're getting overtones of Elijah's ministry in the ministry of the two witnesses. They have the power to shut the sky, that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying. Now, we've just read that they're going to prophesy for 1,260 days. How long did Elijah cause the rains to stop falling for? We'll get to that. We're going to see that Elijah prayed that no rain would come, and that was for 3 years and 6 months, i.e. 1,260 days. So again, we're getting overtones to Elijah's ministry. They have the power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire. We're now getting overtones of the ministry of Moshe and Aaron. Because what did Moshe and Aaron do during the plagues on Egypt? That was one of the things they did. Elohim, through them, turned the waters into blood. And so, let me make a point very clear. I am not saying that the two witnesses are Moses and Elijah. What I am saying is that the two witnesses are operating in a manner that is like Elijah and Moses and Aaron, okay? I'm going to repeat that. I am not saying that the two witnesses are Moses and Elijah, but they operate in the same fashion, in like manner, okay? I do not profess to know the identity of the two witnesses, all right? Disclaimer. But what Scripture is telling you is that they're operating in like fashion, okay? That we can say. Why is this important? And when they have finished their testimony, the beast that rises from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them. So we know they will be overcome. This is where the ministry of the two witnesses differs. They will die. They will give up their lives. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that is symbolically called Sodom in Egypt, where their master was crucified. Now, where was Yeshua crucified? In Jerusalem. So we know that the two witnesses, their ministry seems to have a Middle East focused thing going on, because where they end up dying is Jerusalem. Now, here's what's really interesting. Jerusalem is being called Sodom and Egypt. Now, Sodom is known for being spiritually adulterous, shall we say, right? Lusting after strange flesh. Egypt is known for bondage. The house of Israel was in bondage in Egypt. And so I believe what Scripture is telling us, that at the end of this age, Jerusalem, his people, will be adulterous and in bondage. Okay? Now, here's the question. Again, I'm going to sow a seed. The two witnesses seem to have a Jerusalem-centered ministry, if I can call it that. But we know that the house of Israel has been scattered to all four corners of the earth. If the question that I asked, is the primary role for the two witnesses for the house of Israel, how can the two witnesses, being Jerusalem focused, how can their testimony now go to the house of Israel? Are there other boots on the ground during that time? I'm just sowing seeds. So what role do the two witnesses have concerning the house of Israel? Because this is all that Revelation tells us, okay? Which on the surface is like, well, they're prophesying to the nations. The Revelation doesn't actually say that. It doesn't actually say that. What Revelation says is measure the set apart place, the naos, and cast the outer court, because that will be trampled by the nations. All it actually says about the two witnesses is that they will prophesy for 1260 days, and it gives you what they will be doing in terms of, calling fire down from heaven and turning waters into blood. It doesn't actually say that they're prophesying to the nations. That's an assumption from the context. So what if the two witnesses are primarily for the house of Israel? What role does it say? Well, Revelation actually tells us a lot more, because we can see that the ministry or the function of the two witnesses is being paralleled with that of Elijah and that of Moshe and Aaron. It's telling you that's the nature of their role. So what does Scripture say regarding the nature of Elijah's role and Moshe's role? This is where the answers start to come together. Let's look at the Moses shadow picture. Exodus 4, verse 6. And he, Yah, said, I am the Elohim of your father, the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Isaac, and the Elohim of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at Elohim. So this is the burning bush incident. Then Yah said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. Now, in the two witnesses passage, what was Jerusalem called? Sodom and Egypt. So we know the house of Israel will be in bondage. Are we in bondage? You betcha. And I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. The very first thing that Yah says to Moshe is, I'm coming to deliver my people. That's the number one thing Yah says to Moshe. And that's the number one thing that Yah says to Moshe, go tell my people this. You're about to be delivered. However, the path to deliverance is going to involve a few storms, right? A few crushings. So could one of the roles of the two witnesses be to tell the house of Israel, you're about to be delivered. However, there's a journey to being delivered. It involves storms, fire, gold refined in the fire, overcoming. In Exodus 5, Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, Yah did not appear to you. It's telling you the state that the house of Israel were in for Moses. They were unbelieving, apathetic. Is this giving us an insight into how the house of Israel will be at the end of this age? Is this telling us why maybe they will need a great tribulation? If they do not believe you, Elohim said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. So this is where Yah gives Moshe the authority, the whole thing about putting his hand in, it comes out leprous, putting it back, and the leprosy is healed. The latter sign, taking water from the Nile, dropping it on the floor, and it turns to blood. Also the staff turning into a snake. These are the signs, right? If they will not believe even these two signs or listen to your voice, again, the house of Israel is in a state that they won't even believe a miracle. Now think of Yeshua's words to the house of Judah. Woe to you, because it will be better in the day of judgment for Sodom, because that if they'd witnessed the signs you have seen, they would have believed and repented. I'm paraphrasing a bit. Nothing new under the sun. The house of Israel is known for being spiritually obstinate. They do not listen to the voice of a prophet, even with miracles attached. You shall take some of the water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. So from Moshe's ministry, look, what was Moshe's primary function? Was it to make a mockery of Egypt and Pharaoh, or was it to deliver an unrepentant, spiritually obstinate people out of bondage through great tribulation? I believe the latter is the primary role. The secondary role, the outcome of that is that Egypt will be humbled. Yah is the great optimizer. You know, Yah said to Moshe, go tell my people they're going to be delivered. But Moshe is like, look at the state of them. Well, they're not going to believe or listen. So the outcome of delivering his people, an outcome of that is that the nation, Egypt, will be judged. Are we seeing a parallel from Moshe to the testimony of the two witnesses? Let's look at the Elijah shadow picture to fill in the gaps, to build this picture. 1 Kings 18, this is the showdown between Elijah and the prophets of Baal, okay? Elijah came near to all the people. Now, who was Elijah prophesying to? The northern kingdom. He wasn't preaching to pagans. Elijah was preaching to a spiritually adulterous northern kingdom. How long will you go hopping between two different opinions? If Yah is Elohim, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people did not answer him a word. Again, look at the state of the house of Israel that they're in. Now, hopping here. This is a terrible English translation. I'll just say it. The word in the Hebrew here is the word Pesach, which is interestingly where the word Pesach comes from. Now, when you look at this word, the dictionaries will say that this word means to hop, to skip over, or to hesitate, or to limp and dance, okay? So there's actually two meanings. One is limping, which is a good definition because it's used in the sense of cripples, actually. But there's a secondary meaning that translators they're not quite sure as to what it means. And they assume that it means to hop, to limp, because one of the actual meanings is linked with King Saul's son. I forget his name, the one that was lame in the feet. And it uses a derivative of this word. Here's the problem. Before we get to the problem, though, this is where the idea that the word Pesach means to pass over, okay? I'm going to make a bold statement here. I believe that attacks the character of your Elohim. I'll make my case as to why. What does this word Pesach actually mean? Can we even know what it means? I believe we can. Elijah's statement is very poorly translated due to a fundamental misunderstanding of the word Pesach. And if you fundamentally misunderstand this word, you will fundamentally misunderstand what the meaning of Pesach is and what even occurred in the incident regarding Egypt and the death of the firstborns. Let's go to Isaiah 31, verse 5. Like birds hovering, so Yah of hosts will protect Jerusalem. He will protect and deliver it. He will spare and rescue it. Okay? Okay, open book test. What imagery is being used to define Yah protecting Jerusalem. Avian imagery, bird imagery. The word hovering there, oof, it means to cover with wings, like, i.e., think of, you know what Yeshua says when, "Oh, Jerusalem, how I wished to put my wings around you like a mother hen covers her chicks." It's the same imagery. So oof means to cover with wings. Okay. It's also used, if I'm not mistaken, regarding being in the wings of the Almighty. This allusion to the Ark of the Covenant. The word protect here is used twice in the Hebrew. Ganan, it means to hedge about, to protect, to defend, to surround. Now, he will spare and rescue Jerusalem. The word there used for spare is pesach. So we've got two words being paralleled with this word pesach. One of the words is to be covered with wings. The other word is to be hedged about and protected, to be surrounded. So let me ask you, can we go down the road that actually the word Pesach does not mean to pass over, it actually means to cover? Think about it. What was the fulfillment of Pesach all about? Being covered, being hedged by the blood. Atonement. Pesach has avian imagery associated with it. Not passing over. The modern idea of Pesach means to pass over. What do you mean? Yah's flown over my head and left me? No, he's covering, he's hedging, he's protecting you from the angel that the death of the firstborn. He's protecting you through the trial. The word Pesach is avian imagery, birds, of which the latter can be found all over the scripture. You find avian imagery everywhere. Being born on eagle's wings. That's used of the Exodus account, the original Pesach story, right? Yeshua's statement to Jerusalem. In fact, we're even going to see it to the woman in the wilderness given the wings of what? A great eagle. Pesach does not mean Passover. It means to hover, to hedge around, to protect, like a bird protecting its hatchlings. This is why I think the modern thing of Passover actually attacks the character of your Elohim. Unknowingly. But this fits the biblical imagery way better. So, going back to Elijah, how long will you go hopping between two different opinions? Okay, this word opinions, seipim, the singular word for that is saif, which can mean twigs or branches, the twigs and branches of a tree. Go look it up in your dictionaries. This means when you translate it literally, you actually get a Hebrew idiom come to the surface. How long will you keep hovering between two branches, i.e. like a bird? The idea is that you got a bird that can't choose between which branch to land on. This also gives huge context to what the birds of heaven are. A whole other thing. It's a Hebrew idiom that Elijah is using to a spiritually apathetic people. How long will you keep hovering like a bird between two different branches? Pick one. Here's the thing. What happens to a bird if it doesn't land on a branch? It will tire itself out and it will drop to the floor, and it's now ripe for predators to come and eat it. Do you see what's being shown in the picture here? And what is it that's causing them to hover and burn themselves out? Their spiritual adultery and leaven and spiritual apathy. Leaven is dangerous, people. Firstly, This should massively deepen and enhance our understanding of what Elohim did over his people during the events of the Pesach. He didn't pass over them. He protected them from the death of the firstborn. He hedged them in through the trial. He covered them. He surrounded them. That's what Pesach is all about. Secondly, this means, and this is going to be important, that there's a Pesach connection to Elijah, speaking to a spiritually apathetic and complacent house of Israel. There's a Pesach connection being here. This is going to be important when we go back to the two witnesses. So let's go back to the two witnesses. I will grant authority on my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. The Great Tribulation ends with an event. The Great Tribulation ends with the fulfillment of the 4 appointed times, of which the first is the resurrection, Yom Teruah. Okay? We know that the two witnesses are raised with Yom Teruah. Revelation 11 says so. If you go 1,260 days back from a Yom Teruah and you count the days back, it will take you to, guess what? The eve of Pesach, into unleavened bread. Interesting. So the ministry of the two witnesses is connected to to Moshe, which is the Pesach story, and Pesach means to hedge in and to protect. It's also connected to Elijah, and there's a Pesach connection to Elijah. Are people seeing what the connections here? Or everything is coming together perfectly. Now, who was Moshe and Elijah speaking to primarily? A spiritually obstinate house of Israel. Now, what did we read in the beginning of Revelation 11? Measure the naos, the true set-apart place. But the outer court, i.e., that which is still of the house, but not in the naos, that's going to be trampled for 42 months. Do you see how the ministry of the two witnesses could actually be primarily to an unrepentant, spiritually obstinate and complacent house of Israel, hence why they even need a great tribulation? These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Elohim of the earth. Now, Zechariah's vision is telling you got two witnesses, two olive trees. Elohim is the pipe that's feeding the gold refined in the fire from the two witnesses to his house. The house of Israel is going to need to overcome. Overcome what? The state they're in. The house of Israel with Moshe and the house of Israel with Elijah is telling you what state they will be in. Why do you think they need gold refined in the fire? Why do you think they will need the storm of all storms to come upon them? What's going to come out of that storm, though? Again, back to Psalm 42. Who is Elohim waiting on and hoping for? Let's look at Elohim's divine providence. Remember that the word Pesach does not mean to pass over. It means to hedge about, to protect, okay, through the trial, okay? Let's look at Revelation 12. When the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given what? the two wings of a great eagle. Again, avian imagery. Now we know that the word Pesach or Pesach is linked to avian imagery. We know that this statement being delivered on the wings of an eagle is used of the Exodus account of the original Pesach story. I've made the case that the 1260 days could begin with a Pesach, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place, look at this, to where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time, 1260 days. She's been protected in the wilderness from the face of the serpent. I believe this is giving us a clue as to what was being said in Revelation 11. Measure the naos to the scepter of Elohim, and the outer court, which is still part of the house, that's going to be trampled. So you see the holy place being protected and the outer court being trampled, i.e. great tribulation, especially when you couple that with the book of Daniel. The two chapters are telling you the same thing, which means it's telling you who the two witnesses are prophesying to the house of Israel. Now remember, the two witnesses seem to be Jerusalem-centered. How is their prophecy making its way to the ends of the earth? Are there boots on the ground? James 5, Yaakov. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed fervently that it might not rain. For 3 years and 6 months, it did not rain on the earth. Interesting, don't you think? This is what we were told also about the two witnesses, that they operate for 1260 days and they've got the power to shut the rains. So if there's going to be drought, let's go back to Elijah. Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, again, Ahab was a weak man, shall we say, being usurped by Jezebel, but he was the king of the northern kingdom, i.e. the house of Israel. As Yah, the Elohim of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. And the word of Yah came to him, depart from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. You shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. So during these 3.5 years, these 1260 days where the house of Israel will experience drought and famine, Elijah is being nourished in the wilderness. This is a direct parallel to the woman being protected in the wilderness for 1260 days. This is also a direct parallel to Revelation 11. Measure the holy place, the naos, but cast the outer court out to be trampled. Again, Elijah, 1 Kings 18, after many days, the word of Yah came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. You're getting confirmation that it was 1260 days, 3.5 years, that Elijah shut the heavens up for. A perfect parallel to the two witnesses. Now, what precedes this? So Elijah prays to shut the rains, right? During that time, during those 3 years, he's by the brook, so he's got water and the ravens are feeding him. This is also the time that Elijah spends time with the widow. And this is where you get the miracle of the jug of oil and the jug of flour never emptying out during the drought. Is this giving us an insight into how the woman in the wilderness, notice the widow, the prophet, Is this giving us an insight into how the woman is nourished and protected from the face of the serpent during those 3.5 years? Is this giving you an insight into what kind of miracles will be seen? What's really interesting, you also get the miracle of Elijah raising the widow's son from the dead. What is going to occur during this period of great tribulation? What's the purpose of miracles? For repentance. What follows this verse, when Elijah prays for the rains to come down, is the showdown between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Interesting. And that takes us back to Pesach. And so, let's piece all of this together. Here is what I believe we're seeing in Zechariah's vision. You have two witnesses spoken of in the book of Revelation. Their primary role is to prophesy to a spiritually complacent and apathetic and spiritually adulterous house of Israel. There's there's gold flowing from the two witnesses. Remember, buy gold refined from me in the fire, Elohim says. And that statement is being given to Laodicea, the lukewarm assembly, i.e. the apathetic, the complacent. There's a chance of overcoming. We saw in part 1, Elohim is the water spout, the tzinur. And that word is part of the same word family of these pipes, these tsantorot. So Elohim is the conduit, the water spout, or the liquid gold spout, as it were, that's feeding gold refined in the fire from the two witnesses into the bowl, into his assembly. Now, we saw from part 1 that the water spout is connected to the trials and storms of our life. As King David said, your water spout, your tornado, your waves, your breakers are on me. And that the purpose of these is so that we are examined and tested and made to look in the mirror of our lives and to repent, to refine us. And we saw from Psalm 42 and 43 that this is connected to Elohim waiting for and hoping on someone. Why is Elohim allowing these trials and tribulations to happen to his people during the Great Tribulation? Is this actually about Elohim's wanting a bride to come out of his people? We can see from the book of Revelation that there's going to be a portion of people that are already bridal material by the time the Great Tribulation starts. But is the purpose of the Great Tribulation to bring in that last remaining remnant of his bride through the trial, the storm of all storms that's going to come upon the earth? We're going to finish up with I'm going to ask questions for the purpose of sowing seeds for the upcoming teachings. How will this play out during the Great Tribulation? Because I'm giving you a broad overview, but does the book of Revelation actually give us, it's the revelation of Messiah, it's giving you answers. But we've just not had all the pieces opened up to us yet. And I believe that the content of today's message is actually another piece, giving us great, great detail of how this will play out and why it will play out. How will this play out during the Great Tribulation regarding the two witnesses? And how could this relate to the 144,000? Because remember, the two witnesses seem to be Jerusalem focused. But how is their prophecy going to the house of Israel which is scattered to all four corners of the earth? Do we have boots on the ground at that time? Are the 144,000 able to hear a song that no one else can hear? Interestingly, there's only one song I read of. It says the Song of Moshe. Oh, look at that, a Pesach connection to a spiritually apathetic people. How does this relate to the bride of Messiah? I just gave an allusion to this. What's the purpose of this? Because we can see from Revelation 11, there's going to be a set apart naos. There's going to be a woman, a bride, protected through the 1260 days. So some of the bride of Messiah already knows or will already know who she is when the tribulation starts. But here's the question. Is more of the bride yet to come in? And is this the true purpose of the Great Tribulation? All of a sudden, this Great Tribulation upon the house of Israel is not of a vindictive, spiteful God. It's actually an act of mercy. How does this relate to our King's heart's desire? How is this about his plan of redemption, his desire, his dream? Does this, let me ask a very bold question here. Does this have eternal repercussions beyond the 7,000 years? We believe it does. How great that is? We will speak on this over the Feast of Sukkot. We will speak on this and in the teachings about the fall appointed times. Have the prophets already spoken on this? I believe so. It was only in putting this teaching series together that I finally started to really understand Zechariah's vision. It was there all along. The prophets have spoken this long ago. He's already given it to us, but our eyes have not yet been opened on this. Turns out the prophets have already spoken on this, all of them. And we'll speak on this again in all the teachings regarding the fall appointed times this year. We truly believe that Elohim is truly pouring his spirit out, and the knowledge is being increased. The knowledge of what? Of his plan of redemption, of his heart's desire. Not the knowledge of Hebrew or Greek. His understanding, his desire, which is of eternal consequence. This goes to, I'm going to make a statement here, and this goes to not only before time, but after it. And we'll speak on this, especially at the Feast of Sukkot. Because all of this, whether it applies to us as individuals, like we covered in part 1, or how this will apply as a corporate house of Israel, as we've covered today, all of this is about a journey from Elohim's distant presence all the way through to Elohim's intimate presence, bridal language. Here's the thing, though. To get from A to B, there's all this. Feelings and emotions of being forgotten. Dealing with the dishonorable vessels from the house of Israel. This wrestle, this battleground of the mind that we will experience because of our fallen state. Yet, can we get to a place of a confident expectation? Do we have a hope that is within us? Is this what the Great Tribulation is all about? Because for Moshe, the journey for the house of Israel out of bondage to the promised land involved all this. In Zechariah's vision, for the gold to go from the two witnesses to his assembly, it's going to involve all of this. Buy gold refined in the fire from me if you overcome. Let's stop here for today, because next week we're going to look at the hope that is within us, the confident expectation that we ought to have despite our struggle. And we're going to look at this statement of send forth your light and your truth, that they may lead me. Let them bring me to your set apart mountain, to your dwelling. By the way, the word there for dwelling is Mishkan, which is the tabernacle. Then we will have exceeding joy. Because there's not only, this is just telling us what we will experience from getting from A to B. This verse is telling us the process, what will guide us from A to B, from his distant presence to his intimate presence. Amen.